Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Tuesday, July 16th, and we are going to be continuing to dive into some of the NFL offseason conversations as we ramp up towards the season. Today I'm going to be giving my list of the top 10 quarterbacks that I would choose to build around if I were the general manager of an NFL franchise. So we're going to be going through that list. Then we are going to be reacting to the news that San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk has officially requested a trade from the 49ers. So we will be diving into that. And then we are going to be previewing the upcoming season for the Miami Dolphins. We are going through all 32 teams and giving season previews for them. Yesterday we did the Buffalo Bills, and now we are sticking with the East and doing the Miami Dolphins. And then finally, to wrap up the show, we'll be reacting to the home run derby that took place last night in the MLB. Actually ended up being a tremendous product in my view, and I thought that it showed why it was the best of all the all-star festivities in American sports. And then finally, we will wrap up the show by talking about the trade package that has reportedly been thrown around from the Utah Jazz in regards to what they would be asking of the Warriors in exchange for Lauri Markkanen, whether or not the Warriors will pull the trigger on that deal and if it would be the right move. But before we get into all of that, just want to remind you to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can have your comment pop up on screen when you leave a tip or donation. You can find that link streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. We are in that point of the offseason in the NFL where all of the excitement is finally starting to build back up, and as much as you have the contenders ready to see their season come into play, there are also a number of fan bases that are excited about the guy that they have at the helm. And there's been some discussions lately nationally that sort of sparked the idea for me to run through this list. So I have my list of the top 10 quarterbacks that I would choose to build around if I was a general manager today. So I chose to make this list based off of what they have proven already, what their age and contract situation looks like, and what the long-term upside and belief in them becoming one of the elite quarterbacks in the league is. And starting off here, number 10, I have Brock Purdy. And this is a situation where Purdy has given 49ers fans just about anything they possibly could have asked for and more, considering that he was a 7th-round draft pick a couple years ago, and he's led the 49ers to 2 NFC championships and a Super Bowl. Why is he so low on this list, though? It's because I don't know if I ever see it in Purdy to become one of the elite guys in the league. And he is plenty talented, and he showed that, every opportunity he's really gotten the chance to. But one of the realities of the situation as well is the fact that Purdy has been in just about the best possible situation to walk into in the NFL from both the head coaching standpoint of having Kyle Shanahan running the show, one of the great innovative offensive minds in the game right now, and skill position players everywhere. George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk, who we're going to be talking about later in the show, Christian McCaffrey. So it's just been, and a very good offensive line as well. So Purdy, as much as you have to commend him for how good he's been, I do wonder what it looks like for him when some of the weapons around him are no longer available to him. So I did feel guilty about putting Purdy this low on the list, but I just think that the upside promise of a lot of these other players is too high to pass up on. And that one of those players includes Caleb Williams, who I have at number 9, and I feel like this is going to be a little bit controversial, even though I don't think that it should be. Caleb Williams was somebody who was seen as a potential generational prospect just a year ago, and no, his final season at USC did not go quite as planned, and he wasn't able to follow up on one of the most dominant performances from a quarterback that we saw from Caleb Williams en route to winning the Heisman just a couple seasons ago. But I think that Caleb Williams definitely has I would say that he has to have a lower floor than Purdy, considering what we have seen from Purdy up to this point, and that he's been great from the jump. But Caleb Williams, I'm betting on the upside here, and I think that when you look at the debate between the two of these players in Purdy and Caleb Williams, you have to take into consideration potential. There's a lot more athletic ability with Caleb Williams. I think making the difficult throws he is going to be better at. Purdy is actually probably more mobile than he gets credit for. I thought that he showed that during the playoffs last year, but Caleb Williams just runs laps around him from that perspective as well. One thing I did consider in the debate between him and Purdy, and something that kind of goes against Caleb Williams, is the fact that Caleb Williams, for a lot of NFL fans, if you dislike him, it's because of some of the loud personality that he can have at times. He's very confident in himself. He's due for a couple cheesy lines every once in a while. And, it's even the stupid things, like just the fact that he seems to be ultra aware of the internet and such. And I would say that Caleb Williams is one of these new generation athletes, and the NFL, where it is very traditional and your quarterback has to say this and this, I do think that Caleb Williams sort of jumps outside the lines of what we expect from quarterbacks to some degree. And I do think that it's an overall statement on where we are headed as just a society, and the fact that Caleb Williams is kind of one of these new age quarterbacks. And I am curious to see how that plays out in a locker room. But at the end of the day, I just think the talent is too great there with Caleb Williams that you can mention some of the other stuff, but I think he's just going to be able to prevail in the NFL. He's walking into an incredible situation in Chicago as well that I think is going to help him really develop over these first couple years. And there's a good chance Caleb Williams is going to be much higher on this list in years to come. Number 8, I have Jordan Love. And Love was a little bit of an inspiration for this list. I was at the gym last week, and ESPN was on. I couldn't hear it itself, but I was at least following along. And I believe it was Mike Tannenbaum who said that he would choose Jordan Love over any other quarterback in the league to build a franchise around. Now, again, I didn't actually have the audio for this segment, so there might have been some other rules, but I thought that was getting extremely ahead of ourselves, and I am definitely a believer in Jordan Love, that he is a starting caliber quarterback and that he's going to be good for some time, but I'm not ready to put him into these elite conversations just yet after just one season. And I understand you can sort of twist the age factor with Jordan Love in either direction that you would like to. He is 26 years old, so he is a little bit on the older side, despite the fact that he has had such little playing experience in the NFL. So you would think that, he's already kind of rounded out and that he was able to improve, even if he was on the bench for those first couple seasons. He was coming up with Matt LaFleur, so there should be a really good connection between him and the offense that they're running there in Green Bay. And again, I'm in on him, but I'm not ready to put him over some of the other players that have proven so much more than them and Love is only marginally younger than some of these other quarterbacks that we've seen make multiple conference championships, the playoffs on a regular basis. So I have Jordan Love at 8 on this list. Again, no shame in that because I do think that we are seeing the rise of this next generation of quarterbacks, and there are a lot of good options, but I do have Love on the lower end of this top 10. Number 7, I have Trevor Lawrence. And I think that I understand that Trevor Lawrence has not been incredible to begin his NFL career. I didn't realize quite how unpopular he was until this summer, making some videos on Lawrence. I understand he has not lived up to expectations up to this point. And while you can blame some really bad circumstances that he walked into his rookie season in the NFL with Urban Meyer and with not a lot of receivers around him, since then the Jaguars have done an incredible job of building a roster around Trevor Lawrence to help him succeed. And I would say for the most part he's been able to do so, but we've seen some flashes, but we have not seen consistency from Trevor Lawrence at a super high-end level. Now, he did pull off an incredible comeback in a playoff game against the Chargers just a couple seasons ago, but he was also a big part in putting them in that hole with some sloppy turnovers then. So Lawrence is in this situation where I believe in the pedigree of him. Going back to Clemson, he was undisputably one of the best talents that I had ever seen in college football, at least myself personally. And I do believe in the long-term effect of Trevor Lawrence, but it's definitely been somewhat underwhelming up to this point. And I had to drop him down further than I really wanted to just because of the idea of it's great that you were unbelievable, coming into college as a high school prospect, and then in college he was unbelievable, but got to see something in the NFL at some point, and I just feel better. I think about the consistency of the players who are ahead of him. And one of the players I was very surprised that I ended up going with is Justin Herbert at number 6, where Herbert also feels like a very polarizing player here. There's obviously that narrative about the fact that, what did Emmanuel Aiko call him? A social media quarterback or something along those lines. Justin Herbert can flat out play, and he is a very good quarterback that has been subject to some less than ideal situations. First off, he plays for the Chargers, who are one of the more cursed organizations in the NFL with some of the injuries that he's been dealing with to his receivers. But Justin Herbert, the talent alone, I think the vast majority of teams would take him in a heartbeat. The idea that he was even being shopped around to whatever degree this offseason was crazy to me. But Justin Herbert has definitely not gotten the respect that I think he overall does deserve. He is an incredible talent. Number 5, I have Lamar Jackson, a 2-time MVP already at just 27 years old. And the improvement in the passing game has been tremendous from when he started coming into the NFL. And that's something that I can absolutely buy into, and especially, with the athletic frame that he has, maybe a little bit on the skinnier side, lost some weight this offseason, but, of course, the way that he is the prototypical dual threat. And before it was more so that he was leaning on the running. Now I do believe that he has a more developed arm, and that is going to be a recipe that just about any team can have success with. I have him a little bit lower because to some degree, the passing has gotten a whole lot better, but there has been some concern with his arm in the past. And with my number 4 pick, I maybe am overreacting a little bit to last year, but even going back to college, I have been a big fan of CJ Stroud, and he just put together maybe the most impressive rookie season in NFL history with the stats that he went out there and the records he broke along the way, taking a Texans team that was in no way expected to be in the playoff picture and was more so expected to be at the top of the draft again. But CJ Stroud was unbelievable and carried their offense to new heights. You saw him unlock players such as Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz, who could have been fine pros anyways, but definitely took them to different levels this year. And you just know that, CJ Stroud is a leader, and he is going to be the focal point of this Texans offense for years to come. So again, maybe I don't feel great about putting him over Lamar Jackson, who, for whatever it's worth, Lamar beat CJ Stroud in the playoffs this past year, but wins are not a quarterback stat in my eyes. Lamar Jackson was on a much superior Ravens team. He's also 27 in comparison to CJ Stroud, who is just 23. So ultimately, I feel good, not great, about having Stroud at 4. Number 3, I have Joe Burrow. I think that he is probably the second best quarterback in the NFL today. The reason I have him at number 3 is because of the idea of an injury history. Now, it's one of those things that I've talked about in the past. I do feel like it gets overblown to some degree because it's not this one injury that is a glaring concern for Joe Burrow, but he's had a lot of freak accidents just sort of roll up on him. Obviously, the hit that had him tear just about everything in his knee his rookie year. This past season, having a calf strain in preseason, and then ultimately the wrist thumb injury that took him out for the rest of the year. Non-related, maybe the calf and the knee injuries were a little bit related, but I do think that Joe Burrow is going to be healthy, but it is one of those things that you can point to and have concerns with. So that was the slight difference maker for me putting together this list, because number 2, I have Josh Allen. And I would argue that Allen definitely puts himself in harm's way a lot more than Joe Burrow in terms of putting himself in position to be injured. So maybe, again, it was so close for me between these two players. I think they're the second and third best quarterbacks in the NFL. I have Joe Burrow slightly better, but Josh Allen, I think he has the physical frame to be durable and to stay athletic for the remainder of his career. I think that we are seeing him add layers to his game the way that we talked about yesterday on the show. I feel like he is able to now strategically, methodically put together drives more so than he was early in his career when it was more home run or bust. But again, I think you can go either way with Allen and Burrow at number 2. Number 1, though, is Patrick Mahomes, and it's really no surprise here. He is going into his age 29 season here, has not hit 30 yet, and I still feel like, despite how much older, he is the oldest player on this list. Burrow and Allen both headed into age 28 seasons. But ultimately, with Mahomes, I still feel just as good about him playing the next 10 years as well as anybody else on this list. Now, Father Time would probably disagree with that take, but at the same time, Mahomes, I'm just betting on him until I go broke at this point. And that was sort of my philosophy at points here during the most recent playoffs. I learned that when I thought that the Ravens were going to beat the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, but Mahomes is just always seeming to find a way to make the big play at the end of the game to put them over the edge. I'm going with Patrick Mahomes, already a 3-time Super Bowl champion, and is probably going to add more to his collection by the time that he's done. But a couple quick names that I did not include on this list. I didn't include Dak Prescott and Tua Tagovailoa. Those are probably the two that I contemplated at least the most. Dak is headed into his age 31 season. Not somebody that has ever... Last year, he was runner-up in MVP, and he was very impressive. I think that he is somebody who is unquestionably a top 10 quarterback that gets a lot of disrespect from the national media because he has a little bit of that Cowboys tax to him from a PR perspective. But at the same time, he's not somebody that I would hand the keys to my franchise over to. Very little contractual control over him going into his final season of his contract, and is going to be a free agent that gets 50 plus, maybe even $60 million by next year. So And I don't know if he is that level of player who can elevate a mediocre offense over the top. And I would say that the Cowboys have done him pretty good justice in terms of the pieces that he's been surrounded with, the offensive line he's been playing behind, the rush attack up until this past season. But I left out him, and I left out Tua, who we are going to be diving into a little bit more later in this show when we dive into the Miami Dolphins season preview. But before we get into that, we are going to be taking a break here, and we have to react to the breaking news that San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk has officially requested a trade. It has been rumored for a lot of this offseason. He's been putting out some cryptic messages about him wanting to be moved, and now he has officially made these statements. So we're going to be diving into all of that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and we got the news earlier this morning that San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk has requested a trade officially from the 49ers. This is not necessarily a massive surprise. Aiyuk has been sending signals that he was interested in a trade as he has been going through the contract negotiation process with the 49ers. Aiyuk headed into the final year of his rookie contract, and he has been, I think, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Maybe hasn't gotten quite his due. I was having a discussion with one of my cousins over the weekend, and we had a debate as to whether or not he can be a true number one wide receiver. And I didn't realize that there were quite as many people that were anti-Brandon Aiyuk until then, because I have seen Aiyuk since it was just about, halfway through it was either his rookie season or his sophomore season that he was really able to amp up the production level, and he's been electric since. Aiyuk was very highly regarded coming into the NFL, and I think that it just took him a little bit to be able to fully adjust, but once he fully got himself going, he kind of hit the ground running there, and he has been an unbelievable player who has been able to produce at a very high level despite the fact that he hasn't been the number one option in that San Francisco offense, where you look, wide receiver one would be Deebo Samuel. Christian McCaffrey probably even supersedes him as the 49ers number one offensive weapon, but Aiyuk still has had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Last year had over 1,300, and again, that is on limited targets, just 105, so the yards per reception, he's been extremely efficient. And yeah, no doubt, there are other players on his offense that have been able to garner some of the attention of opposing coaches and defenses that maybe open up Brandon Aiyuk a little bit more in comparison to if he was the number one game plan threat for opposing teams. But either way, I still feel like Aiyuk is going to be able to translate as an effective option for years to come. And I think there are a number of teams that should, without hesitation, try and go and make a move for him. You know, Aiyuk was just all-pro second team last year, and I would bet money that that's not going to be the final time that he does in his career. Now, if the 49ers were to consider a trade for him, and that's the thing, is before I even get into that, really at the end of the day, I just don't think he is going to be moved. I am sure with all the months of speculation that have surrounded Brandon Aiyuk at this point in the offseason, that if the 49ers were going to make a move off of Brandon Aiyuk, it would have been ahead of this year's draft. We don't see player-for-player trades in the NFL, so they probably would have wanted a first-round pick, maybe a day 2 pick as well, and some future compensation. But getting at least picks in the now that would be able to help potentially contribute to a Super Bowl this season. The 49ers are coming off of 2 straight NFC Championship appearances. They were in the Super Bowl last year, and they feel like their window is still wide open. And it really wouldn't make that much sense for them to move off of Aiyuk because he's not happy there. Obviously, you know, there's the human element there, that what version of him are you going to get if he is checked out? But at the same time, I just feel like we've seen pretty consistently that these types of holdouts just don't play out well for the majority of NFL athletes, and that they end up costing themselves money. So I have a very hard time believing that Brandon Aiyuk would set out the entirety of the upcoming season and that he would be able to be a contributing player. Now, he's in a contract year, so it's not like you have to worry about him throwing anything. And Aiyuk is such an elite asset because as much as it is the receiving and being a consistent option, didn't even mention the fact that Debo, for as great as he is definitely more of an injury concern there. So Aiyuk is almost the stabilizing force, and you can throw George Kittle in that conversation as well, somebody who's dealt with, and Christian McCaffrey as well, even though he's been healthy since coming to San Francisco. But you look at, there's an immense amount of talent on that 49ers roster, but I would say that Brandon Aiyuk has been the most available player for the 49ers since really his rookie season, where he's played in, I think he's missed just one game out of whatever the math would be on that one. 53 or so games, whatever it is. Don't like doing math live at the time, but yeah, 51 games. He's played in 50 of them, I believe, since 2021. So, and that game was this past year when the 49ers really weren't trying. So he's been extremely reliable for them. He's an integral part of not just their pass game, but he is one of the best blocking wide receivers in the NFL. Somebody who is going to give you 100% effort on just about every single play. And, you know, ultimately, I think that you are going to see Aiyuk be able to have that same effect, you know, no matter what team that he's on, and that he is going to bring an impactful approach to both the pass and run games for any team. And all of that to be said, again, I don't see it happening this year with an Aiyuk trade. They are all in. They understand they're going to be getting extremely more, and they're going to continue to be more and more expensive, that they're going to have to pay their players, most notably Brock Purdy, who has been on the cheapest deal in the NFL the past couple seasons and is now probably going to be making, I mean, there's a good chance he's going to hit that $50 million mark if Jared Goff did this past offseason. So They understand what is sort of looming in front of them in terms of financial handicaps. So I think they're going to be all in on this season, sort of similar to how the Bengals and wide receiver T. Higgins are just going to have to come to terms for this one season and give it their best go, because I don't know if I see, proper financial compensation coming in the future. Now, for the Bengals and the T. Higgins example, it's sort of a no-brainer. They're going to have to pay Jamar Chase. They are paying Joe Burrow. I don't think you can pay a third wide receiver. When you look at the 49ers, it's an interesting conversation, because I would argue that Deebo Samuel, when healthy, is a better wide receiver than Brandon Aiyuk. But also at the same time, you have Deebo and you have Aiyuk, who is probably a better bet long term in terms of the fact that he is still far younger than Deebo is, and he has been, like I mentioned, extremely reliable from a health perspective the past few years. So I don't think it's quite as easy there for the 49ers. We'll see how this goes. They obviously just drafted a first-round wide receiver this past year, and Ricky Pearsall, who I have very high expectations for. Pearsall out of Florida. And, ultimately, I'm not sure how they're going to choose to go about this. Kyle Shanahan is an offensive mastermind, and I think he'll be able to scheme up a successful plan despite who is playing at wide receiver, and maybe they can be a little bit more interchangeable. But it's no doubt that Brock Purdy and Shanahan, to some degree, have benefited from the immense level of talent that has been surrounding them. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. I don't think that Aiyuk gets moved. I feel like there's a pretty good chance that after this season they could make a big move and end up actually clearing out some room for Aiyuk, but we will have to see there. Let me know what you think in the comments section about whether or not Aiyuk is going to be traded, what types of teams you would hope he gets traded to. I know personally, as a Patriots fan, I would be 100% in on Brandon Aiyuk if they were to look to trade for him. I think you can probably make up a number of different good fits for Aiyuk in the NFL, but again, don't see it happening necessarily this offseason. But we sort of referenced, at least earlier in the show, the idea of Tua Tagovailoa and my doubts with him. We are going to be doing a season preview for the Miami Dolphins next, that we will be going over their biggest offseason moves, their additions, their subtractions, and ultimately taking a look at their schedule and trying to predict how many wins they will win. So how many games they will win, I should say. So we're going to be diving into that, but first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue on with our new segment, A Day, where we are going to be previewing different season breakdowns. And today we are going to be talking about the Miami Dolphins and what lies ahead for them in the 2024-25 season. When you talk about the Dolphins, obviously the idea is that they are capable of being a championship contending team, but the biggest question marks, I feel at least, lie with quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, who had a career year last season in 2023. He set career highs in a number of important marks. He led the NFL in passing yards with 4,624 yards. He threw for 29 touchdowns, and something that was pretty important for him was the fact that he played in all 17 games. A lot of people had concerns with him coming out of a 2022 season where he was looked into for concussions at least twice. It could have been 3 times, but Tua even talked about the fact that retirement did at least cross his mind, and that is something that is really concerning to hear from somebody who is just coming out of his rookie deal. He's on the final year of his contract this season. So it doesn't seem like he is going to be signing a long-term deal with the Dolphins this season, but he could be putting himself in for a payday if he does perform again this season. And again, I think that the fact that he played in every single game this past year does at least put, to some degree, I know he came into the NFL with a nagging injury as well, but ultimately my concern with him isn't the health, it is the ability, and he has done an incredible job. I mean, you look at the numbers that are currently on the screen, he did a very good job from a production standpoint last year, but one of the realities of the situation, and it's somewhat similar to the Brock Purdy conversation, is that I feel like a lot of different quarterbacks could have success in this Miami situation, and that Tua is a little bit of a product of where he is. And Tua, there was real promise with him coming out of Alabama, the way that he was able to step in for Jalen Hurts when Hurts was underperforming and turn the team around. Obviously Hurts takes over at the end of that run, but Tua is somebody who legitimately earned that high overall draft selection and earned the benefit of the doubt for a bit there, but I don't know if it's necessarily translated to the NFL. And again, the numbers would disagree with me there, so there might be people in the comments section who are killing me for not being a Tua believer, but I just don't know if I ever see him being somebody at the end of a game that you feel super confident in his ability to overcome the odds. And I saw Will Levis outperform him in a primetime game in a crunch time situation with a worse offense than, and I know that Tyreek was dealing with some injuries during that game as well, so I want to throw that out there, but either way, I stand by what I said. And you look at the overall offense that is being run in Miami right now. Mike McDaniel has been a revelation for this Dolphins team, and he has been sort of transforming the game around him. It's one of the best offensive schemes in the NFL. The way that they have all of these pre-snap motions and the just ability to find all of these diamond in the rough players that can just flat out run. Now, it was obviously a big swing for Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle was also a first round selection, so it's not like they're making total magic happen in terms of how they, where these players are coming from necessarily, but you look at their run game and the way that has been not just one of the fastest backfield duos in Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane, but I think that ultimately, the way that you see the different schemes they run in terms of the zone runs, and everybody's just always moving. It's keeping the defense on their toes, and ultimately we just see so much speed all over the place that it is a very dangerous offense. And to Tua's credit, he is able to capitalize on the situations where he is kind of feeding the whole family. Everybody's getting involved. Obviously, anytime he underthrows Tyreek Hill, people who are not Tua people will tweet it out at him. I think that that's a little bit extreme, and it's hard to keep up with Tyreek Hill sometimes, but it is something where I have my doubts with Tua, and I don't know if that's something that is going to turn around. Now I can be proven wrong, and I would be happy to at this point, but I just think that Mike McDaniel is kind of the star of that offense, even more so than Tua is. And I'll be very curious to see, like I mentioned, it doesn't seem like they're going to be coming to a contract agreement this offseason, and we'll see what the long-term future of Tua in Miami looks like. But looking at the defensive side of the ball, they lost a key player this offseason in Christian Wilkins, who I don't think gets enough credit for the impact that he has on games. Something to monitor is the fact that he did just have a career high in sacks in a contract year. He doubled his career high. It was 4.5 previously a few years ago. This past year he had 9. But I think it's way more than that. Now, they used him as more of a pass rusher this past season, and he converted on that, but he's been one of the best run stuffers in the game as well. Now, his overall tackle numbers were down this year pretty significantly, 65 total tackles, which is the lowest in a season that he has had since 2020. But I do believe that this is a legitimate loss for them up front and somebody that's been a leader of their defense. But they've made their share of moves as well to round out the roster. Benito Jones is somebody to look at. You're not going to be able to entirely make up the production of Christian Wilkins, but somebody they signed from the Lions last year who was a consistent starter for them and filled the middle a little bit more. But when you look at this defense and what they have, when fully healthy, they were one of the best pass rushes in the NFL last season. They had Wilkins, they had Andrew Van Ginkel, who they did also lose in the offseason, signed with the Minnesota Vikings. But Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips are an absolutely electrifying duo when healthy. I do have some injury concerns with Bradley Chubb. Jalen Phillips last year I thought was a little bit more of an aberration, but Zach Sealer as well from the D-line gave him a career season with 10 sacks there. They're adding a couple other players. You look at Chop Robinson, who they selected in the first round. Sneaky signing of Calais Campbell as well, who is going to be 38 years old next season, but had 6.5 sacks last year for Atlanta and is just a good veteran presence, another body, because you saw by the playoffs this Dolphins team was just riddled with injuries, and it was really difficult for them to keep up with it. They were playing a Melvin Ingram who is just so far past his prime. And not just that they had him on the line, but they had him in coverage as well. Not to send an unnecessary shot at Melvin Ingram by any means, but it was pretty rough stuff with that defense. That was a lot better than the version that you saw in the postseason. A lot of people are really high on their secondary. I'm not quite as high. Now, Jalen Ramsey was dealing with injuries last season. I think that he is still not too far removed from a few All-Pro selections, most recently in the 2021-22 season. So he's an impact guy when he's out there for him. No, he's probably not going to give you All-Pro impact, but at least is somebody who is an experienced player that you can go out and trust. They did release Xavier Howard, who was a longtime member of the Dolphins, but they brought in some vets in Jordan Poyer and Kendall Fuller as well to sort of shape up that secondary. And then the last signing that I did sneaky like for them was Jordan Brooks, a little bit underrated as well, played linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks and is now going to have an opportunity to be, a name on the Dolphins this upcoming year. Now, looking at their schedule as a whole, Sharp Football Analysis has the Dolphins with the 8th easiest schedule in the league. Their line is at 9.5 wins on the year for the over-under. Just some things that stood out to me in terms of their schedule. They have a couple difficult opponents in weeks 1 and 2 against the Jaguars and the Bills, but they do get those games at home, and if they are able to take care of business in weeks 1 and 2, week 2 is Thursday Night Football, I will add just for the sake of that, but they're able to beat the Jaguars and the Bills, they can be looking at a nice string of wins to start the season leading into that bye week, maybe even a little bit extended as well, going into week 7 and 8 against the Colts on the road and the Cardinals at home. Again, not locking them into any one of these games necessarily, but there's definitely a realistic path for them to start 5-0, maybe even a little bit better there, coming out of that bye week, week 6. But the other part of the schedule I wanted to look at was the end, where you can see 4 out of their last 6 games are on the road against pretty intimidating opponents. It is at Green Bay in week 13, at Houston in week 15, at Cleveland week 17, and at New York against the Jets in week 18. Also, you throw in some matchups against the Jets at home and the 49ers at home. That is a very tough stretch to end the season, in my opinion. So ultimately, when I went through, again, just gut reactions, win or a loss, I ended up with them being a 10-17. So just like yesterday with the Bills, I have the Dolphins very slightly over in this season. So they're going to be one of those teams that are hanging around playoff contention. I feel like they are going to. Now, I had the Bills at 11 wins yesterday, which would mean that I have the Bills winning that AFC North, which I do, or AFC East, I should say, which I do sort of stand by. I feel like a lot of people hopped off of the Bills earlier than they should have, but Dolphins absolutely have a case to be made for winning that division. So again, just reiterating, I have them at 10-7. They will be a playoff team, but again, story of the season is going to be, do you believe in the future of the Dolphins with Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback? But let me know whether or not you do believe in Tua and this Dolphins team and what your expectations are for both regular season and postseason success. But we are going to be taking our next break here. When we come back on the other side, we will be diving into last night's MLB Home Run Derby, which actually ended up being thrilling. There was some other events taking place as well that made it stand out, at least on social media, referring to a national anthem performance and overall just the state of where the MLB is at in terms of their all-star festivities in comparison to a pretty lackluster group of all-star weekends and events across American sports. So we're going to be diving into that, but first a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and I want to touch on last night's MLB Home Run Derby that took place we had some other all-star festivities over the weekend with some of the, prospect events, the skills competition, the futures game, and all of that, but, eyes really turned to the all-star break last night with the Home Run Derby. And I think that it solidified that it is by far the best all-star event in American sports. There are just not really many competitors, to be honest with them. The dunk contest is something that should be on par with the Home Run Derby, in my opinion. That is for the NBA. But the dunk contest has just seen a number of different issues that have popped up over the years. One of them being the lack of star power in the dunk contest, and Jaylen Brown even participated this year, and everybody was upset with the fact that what the performance he gave them and such. So that is something that hasn't been great for them, that there hasn't been star power in the dunk contest, but also the fact that there is this idea or this excitement that we're going to see something we never have before in the dunk contest. And at this point, we've just seen so many different varieties of dunks that it can be watered down for us a little bit. The home run derby, you know what you're getting. You are getting professional athletes just destroying baseballs on a regular basis. And I don't know, I feel like because of the fact that the expectations are so much more realistic and down to earth, that it ends up coming away as long as there is a good, competitive finish to it, that the event ends up being memorable. And I do think that this is going to be a memorable one. Now, to some degree as well, the MLB was having troubles just like the NBA in terms of star power, not necessarily being quite as interested in participating in the events. But I still feel like the overall pool that they got together was good enough, and you got a key star in Bobby Witt Jr., who was able to give a big time performance for them, and he ends up going to the finals against Teoscar Hernandez. It comes down to literally the last ball between the two of them, and Teoscar Hernandez, also somebody that I feel like has been largely underrated for the past few years. Now, I know he got an all-star appearance in 21 or 22, so it's not like Teoscar Hernandez hasn't gotten his dues by any means, but he is, I just feel like, one of the easiest players to root for in the MLB, and I'm glad that he's getting this chance with the Dodgers to have some more eyes on him and showing the type of impact that he has on baseball teams, because, again, I'm just a very big fan of his game. And having him and Bobby Witt Jr., this young star, where you talk about the MLB having issues sometimes in terms of marketability for their young players, Home Run Derby is the perfect opportunity to do so. Fortunately, we didn't get the performance we were hoping from Gunnar Henderson. I had expectations for him in this event as well, but that didn't end up coming to fruition. But again, like I mentioned, ended up being a very close finals between Teoscar Hernandez and Bobby Witt Jr. Hernandez hit 14, Bobby Witt Jr. with 13 in the final round. He had 2 outs remaining. It seemed like he was going to be able to tie up Teoscar, but that final pitch came just short of the wall in deep center, and Teoscar ended up taking it home, being the first ever Dodger in franchise history to win the Home Run Derby, which was a little bit surprising. And we have a comment from Anthony Manzano. You had a couple of guys in that competition that are not natural home run hitters. They're more average and slap hitters. I would agree with that, and I think that you can throw Bobby Witt Jr. into that conversation as well, where Bobby, I gotta double check his stats. The last time I looked, he was at 15 home runs with a couple days left into the All-Star break. But you look at the average exit velocity on his swings, I mean, he smacks the ball, absolutely, but isn't somebody you necessarily look at as somebody who will perennially hit 30 plus home runs. And maybe that does end up being the case. Maybe I'm selling him a little bit short on that one, but was able to perform. Alec Boehm is another example. I was incredibly surprised with the performance that he was able to put out there. Ended up going to a shootout against Teoscar Hernandez in that semifinals. That it was really fun to see Boehm as well, who I think is another one of these likable players. Not quite, I don't know if I'd call him a rising star. I believe he's 28 years old, so he's definitely still improving, and he's on one of the premier franchises in the MLB, so that was a little bit of a good marketing thing there. Last couple notes is Pete Alonso. Pretty disappointing, and that's where you get the natural home run hitters, and Pete Alonso just wasn't able to really compete this season, or at least in the Home Run Derby. Hit just 12 home runs. He was the first player to be eliminated. 12 ended up being the least amount by any player in the Home Run Derby. Anthony with some stats here. Gunnar, Bobby, and Alec are maybe at best 20 to 25 homer guys a season. I mean, Gunnar is already, I'm pretty sure, at 28 home runs. So I'm not ready to put a cap on what Gunnar Henderson can do. But no, absolutely. It's not necessarily the aesthetic of expecting, the usual guys. And Adolis Garcia is kind of in that conversation, but he's just having a down year anyways, which doesn't help him and Pete Alonso. And Jose Ramirez, who's having a great season, but, that's 2 straight pretty underwhelming home run derby appearances. I can't imagine that we are going to see him again. Now, J-Ram did make it to the second round, but ultimately did fall short in that one to Bobby Witt Jr. But, overall here, last thoughts on the home run derby before we'll get into a little bit of draft thoughts, because I actually haven't touched on that just yet. But I think I have to at least mention the national anthem, that I don't want to make quite as big of a joke about it, because this morning we did just get an update from, if for those of you who didn't see, the national anthem was kind of a travesty in terms of the performance from this woman, Ingrid Andress, who is a country singer, and she went out there and it was really, really bad. One of the worst ones that I have ever seen. It gave, Fergie vibes from the NBA All-Star game all those years ago, where there were MLB players that looked like they were sort of, holding back their laughs. It was just a really bad moment. And this morning she posted on her Instagram that she was drunk and that she's checking herself into rehab. So again, I understand it was a horrendous moment on national TV, and you have to have sympathy for, what's going on there. But it was definitely a memorable moment from these All-Star festivities, and, we're hoping for the best for her, because obviously, if she's going to rehab and she's dealing with some stuff, that we want to be sensitive there. But I did think that it was worth at least mentioning there. But as for Anthony has been asking some questions about the 2025 MLB draft and the prospects. It's, I followed along with the draft. I would be, lying to you if I said I was experts on a number of these different players. Mentions the Marlins. They took PJ Morlando, who was one of the few high school picks in the draft. They ended up taking him 16th overall. This was a draft that was more so dominated by a lot of college hitters, even more so than the overall situation. There were far more hitters in the college baseball world than we are typically used to. It is kind of interesting when you do look at what the trajectory of the MLB draft could look like now that we are in this era of the NIL. I know this is going kind of, tangent off of your question, Anthony, but, I can't say I know too much about the high school prospects in this draft. It definitely did steer more so towards the college game, which would be interesting because college baseball is it seems like another developing sort of interest in America in terms of sports. And I think it's because we're getting a little bit more star power at, the college level, that they're trying to go out and get paid. And again, we're talking about a 1-year sample size here in terms of this being the case, but you go back to last year as well, you see Skeens and Cruz and Wyatt Langford and those names that were at the top of last year's draft as well, all being actual big name college players. I don't know if that was necessarily the same exact case with this past year. Jack Caglianone was the biggest, I would say, college star that was available. He ended up falling to 6th in this year's draft. He went to the Kansas City Royals in what was a pretty good pickup there. I'm all for, a Royals franchise that has been, you could say up and coming. I mean, not really, because the future did not seem all that bright last year up until when they signed Bobby Witt Jr. to that massive contract extension, and you were hoping that they were going to be able to surround him with equal talent, and hopefully Caglianone can play into some sort of a role similar there. But again, I don't necessarily have all too much to say about the MLB draft. Again, I'm still sort of working my way into the research behind it. Gotta say, I am a Red Sox fan, so I was pretty happy with how they came away with Braden Montgomery, who, at least in terms of projections of where he was going to land going into the draft, fell all the way to 12th. And this is the second straight year for the Red Sox where they got one of the more notable college players. Last year it was Kyle Teal, who was playing catcher at Virginia, and he ended up being at least seen as a steal. He's been doing very well in minor leagues up to this point in the year as well. So ultimately, I think that I can't complain there all too much, but definitely let me know what your thoughts on the MLB draft are, and if you want me to go into a little bit more of a prepared deep dive into it. We are at this little bit of a middle ground in the sports calendar, so I would absolutely be interested in, diving into it if it's something that you viewers would be into. But that is all the time we have for on this segment. We're going to be taking our final break, and when we come back on the other end, we are going to be talking about the report that came out yesterday as to what a trade package would look like for Lauri Markkanen from the Golden State Warriors, and just talking about whether or not there is any chance that the Warriors can make this type of a splash move this far into the summer that would put them in championship contention next year. So we're going to be diving into all of that, but first, our final break here. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be diving into whether or not the Golden State Warriors can be players for Lauri Markkanen in the offseason for a big-time trade, because as we know, the Warriors, notably losing Klay Thompson this offseason, are sort of falling into a space here where they're grasping onto these final years of Steph Curry's career, and there's a question as to what do they see for themselves in the near future, because they have a variety of different assets from both. They have done a very good job holding on to, good job is sort of subjective, because if you think that there's a move they should have made prior to, then they could have let go of them there. But the Warriors have protected their trade assets for years to come, and those could end up being very valuable picks down the road, depending on how this Warriors era goes here to close out with Steph Curry. And again, it's just a matter of what direction they want to go in. They actually have they also have a number of young players that have been key contributors for them, most notably Jonathan Kuminga and Brandon Pajemski. You can throw in there as well Trace Jackson Davis and Moses Moody. So they do have young talent on the roster as well that they think can be some semblance of what the next era of Golden State basketball looks like. But we are just kind of back in a situation like we were a couple years ago, where it seems like the Warriors have these two coexisting timelines of players playing alongside one another. And by all means, in a perfect world, that is not a bad problem to have whatsoever. Talent for now and talent for the future. But it's different when you look at the situation of Steph Curry, who is this legacy player, one of the greatest players of all time, probably the greatest Warrior of all time. I don't think that that's really a contested idea. I'm not sure who else you would throw in there. Maybe you want to go Wilt, maybe pure peak Kevin Durant, but I think that Steph Curry has to be, the statue guy for the Warriors, and I'm sure Draymond and Clay are going to be included in any future statues as well. But Curry is Mr. Warrior, I feel like, for the most part, and I think that the Warriors do have a duty to some degree right now to surround him with a championship contending roster. And right now, that is just not the case. But this Lauri Markkanen deal is sitting on the table for them in what could be a very fascinating addition for them. And we've talked a little bit about the possibility of it before. Just yesterday, Shams Charania put out a report about what the package would have to include for the Warriors to be able to get Lauri from the Utah Jazz. Quote, the Jazz asked the Warriors for Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Pajemski, Moses Moody, and multiple first-round picks in exchange for Lauri. That is definitely a pretty substantial price there. Talking about 3 of the 4 young players that I mentioned, probably the 3 with the highest ceiling. I'm still a Moses Moody believer. I like Trace Jackson Davis too, but I don't know if he'll ever be anything more than a rotational big. And I don't know how high Moses Moody's ceiling is necessarily either, but I'm a fan of him. I have been. I'm sticking with my guy there. But, Kuminga and Pajemski are legitimate guys at this point. They have pretty much already arrived, and those are 2 solidified rotation players, plus another potential player, and all of their draft capital. That's a steep price to pay for Lauri, and I don't think that would put them in true championship contention. Now, I would say it probably puts them in that second tier of contenders, where I would say the first tier of contenders is the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Denver Nuggets, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. Dallas Mavericks are sort of, they're maybe in tier 1, maybe in tier 2. I haven't fully decided yet necessarily, but the Warriors would be on the same level as maybe some of these other teams, the Grizzlies, the Lakers, you want to go the Suns, the Pelicans, all teams that there's a very clear amount of talent, some solid coaching there as well, but definitely a flawed roster. And at that point, with the Warriors, one of the biggest things that I worry about with them is not having a true big, which it's always different, because I have this, internal debate with myself in terms of how to put together this Warriors roster, that I think they could really use a big, but with Draymond Green at the 4 and his inability to shoot. Now, I do actually think that he shot a career high on 3-pointers last season. I can double check that. It was on a very small sample size for sure. So, take with that what you will. But when you look at Draymond's 3-point shooting, last year he shot 39.5% from 3, which is pretty substantially his best ever percentage, best since 2015-16 as well. Now again, 2.3 attempts per game, so really not all that significant there. That's definitely a shot that other teams are going to be willing to live with is a Draymond Green 3. But I mentioned the Draymond spacing just because of the fact that I think it does sort of limit what type of big options they could go for. That's why Brook Lopez has been a name that I've been interested in for the Warriors, somebody who can protect the rim and can also space out the floor a little bit if Draymond is going to play a little bit more under the basket, or you know how Draymond plays his offense, where he's always sort of running around that free throw line area to do the two-man game with Steph. Very active off-ball screener as well, so you know, that's something that I could get into. Lauri has some size to, you know, at least, and Lauri's a good defender. Now, the fact that he is, when you look at his official measurement here in terms of height, he's listed as a 7-footer on Basketball Reference right now. And he doesn't play that way, and I never think that he's going to be a player that can man up against a Draymond Green, or against a Nikola Jokic, I should say, or an Anthony Davis and shut them down. But we saw this past year having, with the Minnesota Timberwolves and their strategy to shutting down Jokic to whatever degree they could, was putting Karl Anthony Towns, an inferior defender, maybe not somebody who traditionally matches up as your prototypical 5 center, and having another 7-footer in Rudy Gobert roam around the paint and cut off the baseline. I wonder if the Warriors could try and solve that problem against some of the top bigs by having Draymond, who is a very physical defender, obviously never backs down from a challenge, even if it's, you know, ends up hurting them. But having Draymond be the primary defender there and seeing if you can get away with Lauri being a little bit of that roamer role of just having size that can also be around the paint when you need it against these interior forces. I don't know. I'm just sort of spitballing here on the fly of how the Warriors could potentially, you know, solve that problem if this were the deal that they ultimately were to make. But I mean, it's, again, the price you look at is a lot to give up Podziemski and Jonathan Kuminga, but at the same time, I don't think that this would be a total missed opportunity for the Warriors. Again, it might not be the smartest business decision in a vacuum to sell off your entire future for this core that missed the playoffs last year, but there is also a responsibility that you have to Steph Curry. If you're the Jazz, I wouldn't be in a rush to get rid of Lauri by any means if I were the Jazz, but he is also somebody who is going into his age 27 season, and the rest of the Jazz roster is pretty underdeveloped, that it doesn't necessarily seem like there is a window of championship contention that Lauri and the Jazz share in common. But you know, again, somebody that's not getting into his 30s anytime soon. He's entering the final year of his contract, is somebody that I could definitely see the Jazz paying, especially with Danny Ainge, as we've talked about, just sort of makes what he feels like is the best decision in a vacuum, as opposed to how does it play into our overall vision. So Ainge is going to be a stickler in this type of a deal, and for that reason, I don't think anything gets done this offseason. Now, if it sounds like the Jazz season isn't going well and that Lauri doesn't have interest in coming back in the offseason, that maybe they can go and make a move at the trade deadline, but I think we're going to have to wait a little bit. I have a comment from him. Would you do this trade? The Hawks get Andrew Wiggins, Brandon Podziemski, Moses Moody, and a first-round pick, and the Warriors in turn receive Trae Young. I think my gut reaction would be no. That is a very interesting, because I feel like I haven't seen a lot of Trae to the Warriors concepts out there. Now, Trae, the talent is absolutely there. I don't know how that necessarily improves the Warriors roster, though. I mean, it would get them off of an Andrew Wiggins contract that is a negative at this point, and the Warriors feel like they can turn him around. And with that organization, I'm not entirely rooting it out, ruling it out, but at this point, Wiggins does seem like he is a negative contract. The fact that he's going to be making, $30 million for years to come is pretty tough under these new financial regulations. And Podziemski is another one of those rotational players. That being said, Trae Young is also significantly better. So it's an interesting, what would the identity of that Warriors team be? It would be 2 ball handlers and letting it fly. And I think that it could be interesting that, Trae could learn a lot from playing under Steph Curry, essentially. I think there are only so many established stars that Trae would take on a little bit more of a number 2 role. And I would like Trae Young to be a little bit more unselfish. Now, again, he's an incredible talent. When the ball isn't hit in his hands, a lot of the time it's in a worse offensive creator's hand. But I still think you need to have a team that runs a little bit more balanced. And Curry, the way that he has made a living off of the off-ball movement into, a big part of his game while still being a primary creator himself, would be an interesting thing for Trae Young to sort of learn from. He says, Hawks are looking to rebuild and receive a young player while the Warriors can compete and have a young point guard to compete for the future. That's the thing, is Trae at this point, let me double check the age here, but he's got to be probably no older than 25, 26 years old at this point. He's going to be turning 26 later this year. So, yeah, he could be somebody, when you talk about a 2 timelines, and in this concept that you just threw out there as well, Jonathan Kuminga would remain on the Warriors, and you would still have a little bit of that 2 timelines thing of Trae Young and Jonathan Kuminga. Even if things don't work out with Curry, you can talk yourself into a little bit of a nucleus there. Maybe you want to throw Trace Jackson Davis in that conversation as well. So it is definitely an interesting concept. Again, I don't know if that's the move for the Warriors, because they would still have so many holes. Guard is really the only true strength they have. Now, they have a number of bodies on the wing that are impressive, but you're giving up a few of them in this deal. You still don't really have a true center either. Now, you could go small ball with Draymond, but again, sort of leads you into that dilemma that I was just discussing earlier as to how are you going to guard Nikola Jokic and Aaron Gordon in the playoffs. So if I'm the Warriors, I'm probably saying no here. But it's an interesting... Trae Young's a talent that is worth taking a gamble on for some organizations. And again, ultimately, I would go no from the Warriors' perspective, but I think that over a couple drinks, you could maybe talk me into the concept of having this. Trae Young got a lot of Steph Curry comps, obviously, coming out of college as to what he could be. And to some degree, he's not Steph Curry by any means, but at least play style wise, I think that it's the leadership a little bit and the sacrifice that he needs to buy into a little bit more. And I feel like Steph Curry could, install that a little bit in his game. I think it could be very, very beneficial to Trae Young himself to some degree. But we do have to get out of here. The baseball podcast is starting in 5 minutes, but the very last thing I will say is we do have a little bit of breaking news where maybe a little bit smaller stakes, but Gary Trent Jr. has just agreed to a 1-year deal with the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, details around this have not come out yet, but Trent said he wasn't going to take a minimum deal with the Denver Nuggets. Would be a very interesting turn if he does end up taking a very cheap deal in Milwaukee. Gary Trent Jr. is going to be an impact player next year, and I really do like that addition for the Bucks. Our comment section here, got some ews in the chat. I'm curious what that is to, because I think that the Bucks could definitely benefit from having another legitimate guard option. I would say that he's an upgrade over Malik Beasley from last season. And this is actually going to be the second time that the Bucks, that Gary Trent Jr. and Damian Lillard have played together, were previously teammates in Portland. So, the comment here from him, they should have gotten Russ for a two-way player. I mean, Trent definitely does leave some to be desired on the defensive side of the floor, which is already a concern with the Bucks. So I do understand the concern there, but at the same time, you know, Russ, I mean, he's a bench option. He can't be a starter for that team, I don't feel like. And I understand he gives you the energy, he gives you, you know, the defense, the minutes, all of that. But I would not trust him in that offensive system. I think he would get in the way a little bit, I should say. But I really don't hate this for the Bucks. But that's something that we are maybe going to have to look into a little bit more tomorrow, because we are out of time here. Thank you very much to all our contributions from the comment section. Love when we get to make this show a little bit more interactive. But that is all the time we have. Of course, remember to like, follow, subscribe to everybody. Remember to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. Thank you to the support from him, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always at 2:00 p.m. Eastern. So I am TJ Mabardi, and we will see you tomorrow. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn